Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters has a great collection of villains, from the cartoonish Pegasus to the full-on sadistic Yami Marik. In this video, I want to rank them all. As for who's on the list, I am going to include from the original manga and anime, Seto Kaiba, Yami Bakura, Pegasus, the Big Five, Merrick, Noah, Gozuburo, Darts, and Zig Freed, as well as the two movie villains Anubis and Diva, and the villain from Yu-Gi-Oh! Are Yako. For the record, Kaiba's villainhood is only through Death T, so anything he does after that is excluded from his assessment as a villain. I'm excluding Yami Alexander since Capsule Monsters doesn't involve dueling, and Paradox from Bonds Beyond Time since he isn't specific to the Duel Monsters series. I'm also excluding any bad character who is more of a side character, so the likes of Bandit Keith and Weevil. The scoring system is based on 6 criteria that make a good Yu-Gi-Oh! Villain. These criteria are evilness, so how bad a person they really are, duelist, how good a duelist they are, motive, what is their reason for being a villain, memorable, do they leave a lasting impression on us, plan, how grand is their plan and how good are they at executing it, and power, so outside of their dueling prowess, how powerful a character are they, whether that be because of the magic they wield, the influence they have, etc. So without further ado, let's dive in. Coming in at number 12, i.e. the worst villain of Duel Monsters, is Gozuburo. Gozuburo's biggest impact on the world is creating weapons for war, but as far as his villainy in the context of the story goes, his premise is incredibly promising, but with a full botching of the execution. Here's the guy who basically is the reason why Kaiba is who he is. He's a world chess champion, so you know he's a worthy adversary in games, and oh yeah, the reason he's dead is because he killed himself after Kaiba swiped his company from him. All that set up, and what we get is a little cameo at the end of Virtual World. It kinda came across like they just threw him in there to give Kaiba a win. And while it was nice to see Kaiba overcome Exodia, Gozuburo winds up as a villain with a lot of potential that was just never realized. Coming in at number 11 are the Big Five. The Big Five are 5 former executives of Kaiba Corp who first worked under Gozuburo, then later under Seto Kaiba. They worked with Seto to help him take over Kaiba Corp from Gozuburo, then when Kaiba demoted them, they worked with Pegasus to try and take over Kaiba Corp from Seto. Eventually, they were trapped in a virtual reality where they worked with Noah Kaiba to try and snatch the bodies of 5 of Yugi and his friends. Needless to say that in all of these attempts, the Big Five failed miserably. So while they wield one of the cooler boss monsters in Five-Headed Dragon, the fact that they can't defeat Taya or even Serenity in a duel and got fired by the same company twice tells you all you need to know about how big and scary they really are. Coming in at number 10 is Anubis, who ungracefully graces our screens in the movie Pyramid of Light. For the movie canon, Anubis works with Akhenaten to create the Pyramid of Light in an attempt to take the throne from the pharaoh, but was defeated in his attempt to do so. He comes back 5,000 years later to finish the job, but the problem is that we hardly ever see him. He has Kaiba do most of the work by using the Pyramid of Light card to defeat Yugi, and only takes over the duel for the last 4 turns before being defeated, then transforming into the dog form of Anubis before being defeated again. Anubis scores some points for embodying so much evil his veins are popping and formidable enough to summon a monster with 35,000 attack, but a lack of screen time and development prevents him from climbing any higher. Coming in at number 9 is Noah Kaiba. Noah is a character from the anime-exclusive Virtual World arc where he plays the part of the biological son of Gozuburo, who was in line to have a bright future until his life was tragically cut short in a car accident. In an attempt to somewhat preserve him, Gozuburo had Noah's mind uploaded to a virtual world that Noah then attempted to use as his battlefield for taking over Kaiba's body because he's mad at Kaiba for taking the role of brilliant son that should have been his. Now, while the Virtual World arc is littered with below-average duels, Noah helps to compensate by showcasing a strategy involving the most OP Deckmaster Shinato and spirit monsters that somewhat salvages it, even if it does involve a modicum of cheating. Overall, though, Noah is probably remembered more as a brat than a top-tier villain. Coming in at number 8 is another Kaiba-related villain, Zig Freed, who makes his mark in another anime-exclusive arc, the KC Grand Championship, where he and his brother enter the tournament in an attempt to embarrass Kaiba Corp so that his company, Schroeder Corp, can finally become number 1. Kaiba ultimately defeats Zig Freed, but unbeknownst to Kaiba is that Zig Freed has an ace up his sleeve. Dun dun dun. Leon, the other guy who made the finals, is his brother. Unfortunately for the Von Schroeders, this also doesn't work out since Yugi defeats Leon even after Zig Freed's incessant cheating. Which brings me to my main issue with this whole arc, and that is Zig Freed's plan. He wants to one-up Kaiba Corp and make people lose trust in it, but how on earth does publicly admitting to hacking and cheating accomplish this? While his plan could use some work, Zig Freed is at the very least a strong duelist, jointly OTKing two previously respected duelists in Weevil and Rex, defeating Joey and taking Kaiba to the brink. He's also got the whole posh German bully vibe going on, but Zig Freed is less an evil villain and more a rotten egg born out of capitalism. Coming in at number 7 is Yako, the main villain from the manga exclusive Yu-Gi-Oh! R. The plot of this arc involves Yako, Pegasus' adopted son, trying to resurrect Pegasus because remember that in the manga, Bakura actually kills Pegasus. The problem is that Yako thinks Yugi is behind his father's demise, so to get back at him, he wants to revive Pegasus by using Taya as a sacrifice. Oh, and he also hacks Kaiba Corp because in Yu-Gi-Oh! You're not a true villain unless you attempt to take over Kaiba Corp and or kidnap Mokuba. Yako, true to his Sephiroth vibe, is a formidable villain because he wields monsters said to be equivalent to the Egyptian gods, the wicked gods. This allows him to defeat Kaiba before losing to Yugi. That makes him one of the best duelists among the villains, but the motive being built on a misunderstanding of who actually killed Pegasus makes it more frustrating than meaningful. And the whole arc premise rehashes the Duelist Kingdom plotline anyways. Coming in at number 6 is our other movie villain, Diva, also known as Aigami, who features in the dark side of dimensions. Diva has magical abilities granted by the Prana, a mystical force that he and a few others acquired when the Pharaoh departed, but will lose if the Pharaoh ever comes back. So Diva spends the entire movie trying to make sure that doesn't happen. Diva is a pretty good duelist with a sound strategy, thwarted only by Kaiba pulling obelisks from the ground and then the King of Games himself. Now, for a guy who wants to use the Prana to create a utopia, Diva does sure have the tendency to ruin lives, and his evil is fully awakened when he comes into contact with everybody's favorite Millennium item, the Millennium Ring. My issue with Diva though is that while unlike Anubis he gets plenty of screen time in addition to the whole dimension summoning gimmick, most people probably enjoyed this movie the most for Kaiba's duels versus Yugi and Atem. While it's hard to compare a movie villain to ones who have several chapters or episodes of development in the manga and anime, I'd say Diva is about a middle-of-the-road villain. Coming in at number 5 is Seto Kaiba. So like I mentioned at the top of the video, this strictly refers to Kaiba's role as the villain in Death Tea, as well as his extended role as recurring bad dude in the Toei anime. By the time we see him in Duelist Kingdom, he's become more of an anti-hero / rival to Yugi, so his villainhood is confined to these early chapters of the manga and Season 0. But that brief stint as a villain leaves quite the mark because Kaiba is absolutely ruthless. After suffering a loss to the Pharaoh in Duel Monsters, the Pharaoh inflicts a penalty game on him known as the Experience of Death. Once Kaiba recovers, he retaliates by designing an entire theme park of deadly games equipped with his own take on the penalty games, including the Experience of Death, which he unleashes on Grandpa Moto and his own brother. Death Tea Kaiba has no qualms with torturing even his own family, and certainly has no regard for life as he puts Yugi and his friends through several fatal games at a huge disadvantage. Death Tea Kaiba further demonstrates his wickedness by explaining how he acquired the 3 legendary Blue Eyes by downright cruel means, including even driving one of the previous owners to suicide. This ruthlessness, combined with his technological skill and money, make Kaiba a formidable villain who can create predicaments just as dangerous as magic. And while his dueling prowess at this point is a bit difficult to measure given the early simplicity of the game, it is at least known that Kaiba is a top-ranked player, requiring the likes of Exodia to defeat him. Coming in at number 4 is Darts. I may be bullish on Darts compared to others, but he is a total menace. He is far and away the most cunning and calculated. His evil spans for 10,000 years, which includes destroying the lives and loved ones of Raphael, Alistair, and Valen in order to mold them into hating the world so that they do his bidding. He also has stolen thousands, if not millions, of souls, exponentially more than anyone else on the list, to the point that he has a full wall of them like they're refrigerator magnets. He has the ability to spawn Orichalco soldiers anywhere in the world, give life to duel monsters, telekinesis, create weapons out of thin air, and perhaps the most evil of all, he runs a successful company. And yeah, he checks the Take Over Kaiba Corp box too. Darts is able to do all this through the magic of the Orichalcos, a power as old as time itself that allows him to influence events like floods, fires, and wars. Moreover, he's backed by the second strongest being in the entire series, the Great Leviathan. Darts, in my opinion, has the strongest deck in the series and is the best duelist among the villains, coming a custom card made by Pegasus just for the occasion away from taking down the 2 best duelists at once. Overall, Darts checks several boxes from powerful magic to high kill count to strong duelist, so why do I hold him up at 3? There are 2 issues. First, he lacks significant screen time. We usually only see him talking to his henchmen and he only has 1 duel. So while the arc is memorable for the Seal of Orichalcos and events like Yugi losing a duel, the lead villain largely takes a back seat through most of it. The other issue is his motive. Again, most villains in the series don't have the greatest motive, and Darts somewhat suffers from this. When the stones of the Orichalcos show up in Atlantis, they start turning people into monsters, including Darts' own wife. Now, seeing your own wife and entire kingdom turn into monsters would make anyone desperate, and Darts thus turns to the Orichalcos for help, which we know now to be a terrible decision because the Orichalcos corrupts him. And now you got a guy who wants to exterminate mankind because he thinks everybody's evil, when in reality, it's the Orichalcos that's evil. So Darts is the classic, thinks he's doing good, but is actually doing bad. Moving into the top 3, my number 3 choice is
Pegasus!
Pegasus in universe is the creator of Duel Monsters and president of Industrial Illusions. He captures the souls of Mokuba and Grandpa Moto and attempts to draw Kaiba and Yugi to his tournament at Duel's Kingdom, where he wants to defeat them in order to take over Kaiba Corp and restore its status among shareholders. Pegasus is doing all of this so that he has the technology needed to resurrect his loved one, Cecilia. Love driving evil is a common, understandable, and perhaps even good motive in literature, and most villains in Yu-Gi-Oh! Lack a better one. Pegasus as a character is also the most memorable, not just because he's the first in the English anime, but because of his iconic Tune and Relinquish deck and even more iconic mannerisms and catchphrases. Still, for a guy who created the game, he seems to lack the same dueling prowess as most of the other main duelists, boosted only by the magic of the Millennium Eye and cards unreleased to the general public. At number 2, and just barely edging out Darts in my mind, is Merrick. Merrick is, in my opinion, the craziest of the villains. His sadistic nature is as wild as his hair. Merrick uses shadow games to their most torturous extent against the likes of Mai, Joey, Bakura, and Yugi. He kills his father, skins him in the manga, and has no qualms with attempting to kill his sister and adopted brother. He also has no problem taking control of people's minds, and once they failed him, killing them off too. With Merrick, it isn't join him or die, it is quite literally join him and die. This evil is all driven by him as a child being forced into the grim and dark life of a tomb keeper. This makes him resent the pharaoh and want to take his power. This hatred is further exacerbated in seeing how his father treats his adoptive older brother Odeon, Merrick's only protector, and sealed when Shadi suggests to him that his father's death was the pharaoh's doing. Merrick is also one of the most iconic villains, coming from what most consider the best arc of Yu-Gi-Oh! His memeable catchphrases,
You fool! You fool! Don't be a fool! You fool! Wise up, you fool! You fool! You fool! You fool! Silly fools! You fool!
and owning the most powerful of the Egyptian god cards, the Winged Dragon of Ra. He also wields the Millennium Rod, allowing him to band together the Mafia known as the Rare Hunters and mind control characters even as mentally fortified as Taya and Joey. Where Merrick falters is his dueling prowess and planning. You can argue that his dueling style of torturing the opponent is what leads to his less than optimal style of play, but we also can't ignore the fact that he's being carried by the most busted card in the entire series, which has an effect for every situation. As for his planning, he literally fails at everything. His Rare Hunters never win an on-screen duel, he loses Slifer against Yugi when Yugi doesn't even have a guard card to counter, his brainwashing attempts pale against the power of friendship, and he regularly underestimates everyone he's up against. Merrick checks a lot of boxes, and embodying that crazy kind of evil likely lands him at the top of many people's lists, but there is one guy who I think is a notch above the rest. That, of course, is Yami Bakura. Bakura, in my opinion, is a perfect mix of cruel, sadistic evil and calculated evil. In ancient Egypt, he makes quite the entrance when he drags the pharaoh's father's corpse out of his tomb all the way to the pharaoh's court. He also yanks the Millennium Eye out of Pegasus' eye socket, killing him in the process and licking his blood off of it. His cunning is on display throughout the series from start to finish as he pulls the strings to execute his plan, such as sealing a piece of himself within the puzzle. Bakura is also the most powerful of the villains. This is punctuated by the fact that he and Zork, the Lord of Darkness, are one, and only stopped by the combination of all three god cards. Bakura also sports easily the greatest motive of the series. He harbors hatred for the pharaoh and the royal court for massacring his entire village to create the Millennium items. Like Merrick, Bakura goes through this trauma as a child and thus develops a vengeful Ka known as Diabound that he can then use to battle with even the likes of the god cards. This vengeance, while brutal in its means, at least makes us question good and evil as a gray area because Bakura has a legitimate claim to his anger. Yami Bakura's biggest knock is his dueling prowess, and even that is excusable when you consider that all of his losses come to either the lead protagonist or lead antagonist of the arc in which he takes the loss. But while his dueling skill isn't always on full display, Bakura does showcase other talents such as in RPGs, as well as winning most of his Ka battles in ancient Egypt, taking down the likes of Slifer, Blue Eyes, Exodia, and a number of the pharaoh's staff. Bakura checks all the boxes and earns the top spot on my list of top villains from Duel Monsters. For those of you who prefer to think in terms of tiers instead, here's how I tier the villains. Basically, what I mean by this tiering is that you could rearrange the order of anyone on the same tier, and I wouldn't really debate you on it, but if you wanted to move someone up or down a tier, at me in the comments and let me know how you'd rank these 12. And if you're chillin' like a villain, make sure to subscribe to this channel and share this video with others. Until then, catch y'all next time.